Did you know that by the year 2050, more than 800 million people in 570 cities around the world could face the disastrous effects of rising sea levels? That's right, about 90% of the mega-metropolises on the planet are vulnerable to rising water. So it's about time we figure out how we can survive the floods. Perhaps the best solution is a city that floats. The cost of rising sea levels and destructive flooding could reach a whopping $1 trillion before the next century. So pouring billions into innovative floating cities is starting to seem less outrageous and more like a necessity. Floating habitats have only recently become a reality. This is the carbon-neutral Floating Office Rotterdam, which is able to rise along with the sea. Completed in September 2021 by King Willem-Alexander of the Netherlands, the office's foundation is made up of pontoons, allowing the flexibility to move as water levels rise and fall. But this is just a single office building. Could we really live in spacious floating cities with room for hundreds of thousands or even millions of people? From South Korea to the Maldives, and even city ships that travel the world, let's have a look at the future of floating cities. Thalassa and the Marine City. The concept of a city that could survive the changing tides by floating has been around for a while. In 1963, French architect Paul Maimont came up with an idea for the extension of Monaco. He drew up designs of circular shell-like structures that would be supported by floating decks in pre-stressed concrete. He named his creation Thalassa. Maimont had a reputation for avant-garde designs and was a forward thinker. He believed that urban planning just wasn't catching up with an ever-changing society. Architecture had to come up with solutions to the world's problems. He was inspired to create Thalassa after a trip to Tokyo, where he discovered another floating city design. The Marine City by architect Kayanori Kikutake was described as living architecture. Its tower-like construction resembles skyscrapers, but at the same time, it's incredibly unique, with port-like windows and cylindrical buildings. Maimont had these designs in mind while creating Thalassa, but his floating city ended up towerless. Instead, it's a series of disc-like islands. The first level of each building is open. Living spaces are organized in terraces around the empty bottom of the structure, which becomes a pond with beaches, pools, gardens, and a harbor. The first ring of the circular structure is about 26 feet above sea level. Here, Maimont pictured stores, suspended gardens, and plenty of entertainment options like bars and restaurants. The structure's second ring would have similar types of facilities across 7 levels, which are divided into tiers. There would be a collection of offices, hotels, and cultural facilities. But technically speaking, Thalassa wouldn't completely float. Its upper rings would be carried by 28 inclined masts. Yet it's still one of the most intriguing floating city concept designs to come out of the last century. Though Thalassa was never actually built, floating cities like it are slowly becoming a reality. Oceanics Busan. This is Oceanics Busan, and it might soon be the world's first official floating city. Set in the waters off Busan, South Korea's second-largest city, Oceanics hopes to utilize breakthrough technology for coastal cities that are facing down the threat of climate change. The city will span 15.5 acres across 3 interconnected platforms. Designers expect this to be enough space for about 12,000 people. But if all goes well, they hope to extend Oceanics to up to 20 platforms, which could house over 100,000 people. Each of the city's platforms will have its own purpose. The first 3 platforms will be for living, research, and the lodging of visitors. Bridges will connect each platform to the land and create a sheltered lagoon. Here, residents and guests can enjoy a variety of water sports and recreation. There won't be cars on the platforms, but bikes, pedestrian paths, and even aquatic buses could be used to navigate the city. The team behind Oceanics hasn't released specific transportation details for the island, but they promise shared and multimodal mobility. In terms of sustainability, Oceanics' neighborhoods will each treat and replenish their own water. They'll reuse and recycle their resources and use urban farms to grow their food, while floating and rooftop solar panels will generate 100% of their energy. So how exactly will something this ambitious be built? Well, Oceanics has a secret weapon, biorock. Biorock is often used to help repair damaged coral reefs. It absorbs minerals out of seawater in order to form a limestone coating that's stronger, self-sustaining, and self-repairing in comparison to traditional concrete. Biorock will even absorb some carbon dioxide. Oceanics plans to build their platforms from this material, which will be anchored to the seabed. This innovative construction comes with a $627 million price tag for the first 3 platforms. But if all goes well, Oceanics Busan could be finished as soon as 2025 to become the world's first floating city. Maldives floating city. However, if construction hits some obstacles, there's another project that just might beat Oceanics to the punch. The Maldives, known for its floating villas, is working on its own floating city. Most of the Maldives' many islands are less than 3 feet from sea levels, which means that many homes could be submerged by the year 2100. So designing a city that rises with the sea is becoming a pressing issue. That's why they plan to start construction on their floating city, designed as a collaboration between Water Studio, the Maldives government, and developers Dutch Dockland. The aim is to create a fully functioning city made up of 5,000 floating homes. They'll be anchored to the bottom of a lagoon spanning 500 acres. They expect that these housing units could be home to over 20,000 people. Canals will run between the structures, sort of like roads. They can be traveled via boat or really any type of compact water vehicle. The aerial view of the island with its canals and many platforms somewhat resembles a brain, in keeping with the natural vibe of the project. Artificial coral banks will be attached to the undersides of the city to stimulate coral growth and allow marine life to thrive amongst the structures. Like Oceanics, this city at sea will be completely car-free, which seems to be the ideal for most floating cities. The lagoon itself is just 15 minutes by boat from Malé City, which will allow both residents and guests to easily reach land. While on the man-made floating islands, they can move around with boats, bikes, or small electric vehicles like scooters. The Maldives hopes this project will be completed by 2027, which would make it the world's second official floating city. They also recognize that it could be hard to convince people to give up life on land for floating homes. So they plan to offer international visitors residence permits if they purchase a home here. Home prices will start at $150,000 for a studio apartment, while larger homes will cost as much as $250,000. That's pretty reasonable for an island paradise. AT Designs Floating City. What kind of technology will be implemented in the design of these floating cities? For our answer, let's look at AT Designs Floating City, a cool honeycomb-like concept that plans to utilize some existing technology. AT Design Office wants to build a zero-carbon, energy-efficient, and self-sufficient city that spans 4 square miles. To do this, they're looking at using the same technologies used to build a 31-mile bridge between the cities of Hong Kong, Macau, and Zhuhai. Part of the bridge is an underwater tunnel joined by a 492-foot-long precast concrete box. The box is constructed on a nearby island, then floated to site before being connected. To build their floating city, AT Design aims to construct the modules in an island factory, then float them out to the cruise dock at the site of their floating buildings. This would make constructing a floating city a lot more efficient than if pieces had to be airlifted or created on site. As for the structure of the city itself, it would be made up of a collection of prefabricated hexagonal modules. There will be a transport network of yachts and submarines, as well as facilities like a floating hotel and entertainment complex. There will be recreational green spaces both above and below the water levels. Communities could produce their own food and sustainably dispose of refuse thanks to farms and waste collection facilities on the floating structure. AT's cities would also have a unique system of underground tunnels, creating roads and walkways between buildings and islands, setting it apart from the cities in both South Korea and the Maldives. While this innovative city is not yet slated for construction, its design is being reviewed by property investors, and they're likely to start testing the feasibility of the project on a smaller scale, cities on ships. Even if these epic artificial islands and floating metropolises don't work out, we've got another option: cities on ships. If we can't get large-scale buildings to safely float, then we might be able to use the technology already at our disposal to create large cruise ships that people could live on all year round. Let's look at one of the most famous examples, the Freedom Ship. Designed by American engineer Norman Nixon, Freedom Ship is a gigantic skyscraper-like cruise ship that could serve as an alternative to life on land. If constructed, it would become the largest vessel in the world. It would be almost a mile long, at about 4,320 feet. It would be 725 feet wide and 340 feet tall, with 25 stories. That's taller than the length of a football field and wider than 2 football fields. A ship this size could be home to more than 60,000 people across 17,000 housing units. The ship's citizens would circle the world once every 2 years, with occasional stops at ports in some of the world's most popular cities. However, stopping on land wouldn't be completely necessary. The ship would have everything on board to live comfortably, like a regular city. There would be a hospital, colleges, offices, restaurants and bars, and one of the world's largest shopping malls. Ideally, Freedom Ship will operate like its own country. But it's such an elaborate and expensive idea that it would likely only be affordable for the extremely wealthy. The Freedom Ship was ultimately never built. It would cost around $10 billion and include all the complications of forming a new country. But we wouldn't be surprised if floating cities on ships eventually become a reality. There are already plenty of elaborate cruise ships that could be considered mini-cities. So what's more likely, a floating city on a ship or one anchored to the seafloor? Based on the current progress of these projects, our first floating city will likely be in South Korea or the Maldives. So be honest, would you live on one of these floating cities or city ships? If so, then which one would be your dream home? Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the latest facts on the mega projects of the future. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.